10 years of tracking had taught Bula Fireblood exactly how a dying thing sounded when it knew the chase was over, and the wet, ragged snarl rising from the ravine below her told her the Ashfang finally understood. She dropped from the ledge in a crouch, twin hunting knives low at her sides, moonlight sliding off the fitted black leather that hugged her tall, powerful frame from collarbone to thigh. A huntress's armor, cinched tight at the waist with a wide belt of worked hide, fur trim at the shoulders where the cold bit hardest, tall laced boots that let her move like water over root and stone. 10 years she had worn some version of this same leather. 10 years she had slept with the smell of this particular monster in her nose. The beast crouched now against the rock wall of the ravine, ash-gray fur matted with old scars and fresh blood, eyes like dying coals, cornered at last on the very edge of the river that marked where orc land ended and human land began. "You do not get to cross," she told it, low and rough in the human tongue she had learned only so she could curse this creature in every language it might understand. 10 years you ran. Tonight you stop. The Ashfang did not stop. It exploded sideways, shoulder catching stone, and vaulted the shallow river in one bound that should not have been possible from a wounded animal. And Bula was already moving, already screaming a war cry that had gone hoarse a decade ago, because she was not about to let 10 years of her life mean nothing over one river crossing. She did not know, as she splashed through the freezing water after it, that on the other bank a young guardsman named Harlan Cooper was walking the night fence line alone, lantern in one hand and spear he barely knew how to use in the other, and that in the next handful of minutes her whole life was going to bend around him like a river around a stone. Harlan heard it before he saw it, a crashing in the brush like a wagon rolling downhill, branches snapping, something enormous breathing in wet, tearing gasps. He had walked this stretch of fence 100 nights and nothing had ever been worse than a fox in the henhouse. He lifted his lantern high, more out of habit than hope it would help, and the light caught 2 burning eyes 40 paces off and closing fast. "Void take me," he whispered, and then there was no more time for whispering. The Ashfang hit the fence rail like it was made of straw. Harlan threw himself sideways, lantern shattering, oil catching the dry grass in a small stuttering flame, and the beast's claws opened his sleeve and the skin beneath it in one careless swipe as it passed, more interested in flight than in killing him. He hit the ground hard enough to lose his breath, spear skittering away into the dark, and above him the stars wheeled once, twice, and then were blotted out by teeth. He would remember later that he had thought of nothing profound in that moment. No prayer, no regret, no final thought of his mother's farm or the promotion he would never get now. Just teeth, and the stupid, useless thought that he had never even drawn his sword. The teeth never reached him. Something green and furious slammed into the Ashfang from the side hard enough to roll it a full 10 feet, and Harlan lay frozen in the burning grass and watched an orc woman, the first he had ever seen up close and living, drive a hunting knife to the hilt into the beast's shoulder with both hands and her whole considerable weight behind it. The Ashfang screamed, a sound like a saw through green wood, and threw her off with a convulsion of muscle, and she rolled once and came up already reaching for her second blade. "Stay down, human," she snarled at him without even looking, "or I will lose 10 years for the second time tonight because of you." He stayed down. He was not entirely sure he could have done otherwise. The beast broke away from both of them, favoring its wounded shoulder, and crashed off into the deep timber beyond the fence line with a speed that seemed to mock every drop of blood it left behind. Bula Fireblood stood in the scorched grass, chest heaving, knife still dripping, and watched it go with an expression Harlan would spend the next several months trying to properly describe to himself. Grief wore that face. So did fury. So underneath both, did something that looked almost like exhaustion so deep it had become a kind of faith. 10 years, she said again, quieter now, mostly to herself. Then she remembered him. She turned, and Harlan Cooper, 26 years old, guardsman of Thornwatch Crossing, third son of no one important, A man who had been quietly overlooked by every promotion board and every marriageable daughter in town for as long as he could remember, found himself looking up into the face of the most striking woman he had ever seen. Her skin was a deep mossy green touched gold by the last of the burning grass, her tusks small and neat where they pressed against her lower lip, her dark eyes fierce and assessing, her black hair bound back in a thick braid threaded with a single hunting fang. She was easily as tall as he was standing, and he was still sitting in the dirt. "You are bleeding," she said, as though it were an accusation. "I noticed," he managed. "You are an orc. You are observant." She crouched, grabbed his wounded arm with no more ceremony than a farrier checking a horse's leg, turned it toward the moonlight. The claw marks were shallow, more shock than damage. "You will live, which is more than I can say for my 10 years if that thing crosses back into the deep wood before dawn. That thing just tried to eat me. It tries to eat everything. It has been trying to eat everything since before you had hair on your chin, boy." She let go of his arm and stood, and only then did the fence line, the smoldering grass, and the fact that an armed orc woman was standing well inside human territory seem to fully arrive in Harlan's stunned brain. "You are not supposed to be here," he said. "This side of the river is closed to your people, has been since before the last treaty. And that beast is not supposed to be alive," she said. "We are both somewhere we are not supposed to be human. Perhaps that makes us equally guilty, or perhaps it makes neither of us guilty at all. I do not much care which. What I care about is that in 1 more year it makes 10 years exactly since it killed my sister Kesh not 4 days' walk from here, and it has never once let me finish it, and tonight it ran onto your land instead of mine, which means if I do not follow it, I lose the trail for good this time. So," she looked down at him, and something in her posture shifted, not softening exactly, but sharpening into a different kind of intent. "You are going to help me, little guardsman." Harlan laughed before he could stop himself, a short disbelieving bark. "I do not even know your name." "Bula," she said. "Bula Fireblood of the Fireblood line, huntress of my clan for longer than you have likely been allowed to hold a real weapon. And you?" "Harlan Cooper." He got to his feet, wincing at his arm, and found that standing did not much improve the height disparity between them. "And I cannot just let an orc wander around loose in Thornwatch territory, Bula Fireblood. My captain would have my hide. Yours, too, probably, and not in a way either of us would enjoy. Then do not let me wander loose." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, more a baring of teeth that promised trouble. "Walk with me instead. Tell your captain you drove me off if you must later, when it is convenient to your pride. But right now that creature bleeds a trail into your woods that will be gone by morning rain, and I intend to follow it while it is still fresh, with you or over you." He should have said no. He would tell himself that for weeks afterward, that any sensible guardsman, any man with an ounce of self-preservation, would have gone straight to Captain Voss and reported an orc incursion and let the matter end there. But he had felt her fingers on his arm, gentle for all their strength, checking a wound she had no obligation to notice, and he had watched her face when she spoke of her sister, and something in him, some quiet stubborn kindness that had never once been rewarded, decided that this woman deserved better than a spear in the dark. "All right," he said, "but we do this on the border only. You do not go past the old watchtower ruin, and I do not tell my captain your name unless I have to." Bula studied him for a long moment as if recalculating something. "A bargain," she said slowly, testing the word. "Very well, Harlan Cooper, a bargain between strangers. I will hold to my side of it as fiercely as I hold a blade." Neither of them knew yet how completely that bargain would come to swallow both their lives. They tracked the blood trail until the sky went gray, finding nothing but a scattering of coarse ash-colored fur, and one deep gouge in a fallen log where the ashfang had paused to tear bark in what Bula called simple spite. By the time the sun came up, they had reached an agreement without quite meaning to. She would not cross past the ruined watchtower that marked the true border, and he would meet her there every third evening with whatever news the town had of strange livestock deaths, missing hunters, or beasts seen in the deep timber. In exchange, she would keep her word that no harm would come to Thornwatch from her hand, and would help him learn to read a trail properly. Since, as she informed him without much tact, he tracked like a blind ox with a head cold. He went back to the guardhouse that morning with his sleeve torn, and a story about a wolf that got too close to the fence. And Captain Doran Voss, a stocky graying man with a permanent squint and no patience for embellishment, grunted and told him to get the wound looked at and stop scaring the horses. Nobody asked why the grass along the north fence was scorched in a wide arc, or why there was a second, larger set of footprints beside Harlan's own, boots that were clearly not standard guard issue. Nobody asked that first time. It would not stay that way. The ruined watchtower stood on a low rise where the forest thinned before the river, its upper floors long since collapsed, its base still solid enough to shelter from rain. It became their place without either of them naming it so. Harlan came on the appointed nights with bread, with salted meat when he could spare it from his own thin wages, with whatever news he had gathered: a dead calf found half-eaten on the Hollies farm, 3 sheep torn open near the mill pond, always a little further into human land than before. Bula came with information of her own. The Ashfang was healing faster than any natural beast should, likely because of the old blood magic that had twisted it in the first place. Some corruption from a battlefield curse 2 generations gone that had seeped into the deep wood and touched whatever unlucky creature found it first. It should have died of old age a hunter's lifetime ago, she told him one night, sitting with her back against the cold stone, sharpening a knife she did not need to sharpen because her hands wanted something to do while she talked. It does not tire the way a real wolf tires. It does not fear fire the way it should. I have put 3 arrows through its lung and it did not fall. I have burned half a hillside trying to smoke it from a den, and it walked out through the flames laughing at me, if a beast can laugh. And you have chased it for 10 years, since I was 19 summers old. Since the night it took my sister Kesh apart in front of me while I was too slow, too frightened, too young to do anything but watch. Her jaw worked. My clan gave me a year of mourning, as is proper. When the year ended and I did not stop hunting it, they gave me a second year out of respect. When I did not stop after the second, they began to call it obsession instead of honor. My own mother, matriarch of our line, has asked me 4 times now to set it aside and take a mate, build a hall, give her grandchildren before I am too old and too scarred for any warrior to want me. She said this last part with a flatness that did not quite disguise the old wound beneath it. I have refused 4 times. Harlan, sitting across the small fire they allowed themselves in the tower's sheltered base, turned that over carefully before he spoke, because he had already learned that Bula Fireblood did not want comfort offered cheaply. Do you want a mate, or do you just not want to be told when to want one? She looked up at him sharply, and for a moment he thought he had overstepped, that 10 years of grief did not appreciate being poked by a human guardsman who had known her all of 2 weeks. Then, slowly, the corner of her mouth curved. You ask better questions than most men twice your age and rank, Harlan Cooper. No, I do not think I mind the idea of a mate. I mind being handed one like a prize animal, chosen for me because my mother thinks it will fix what she believes is broken in me. Nothing about you looks broken to me, he said, and meant it, and then flushed at how plainly it had come out and busied himself with the fire so he would not have to see how she took it. She did not answer that night. But she looked at him a moment longer than she needed to, and when she rose to leave before dawn, as she always did, her hand rested briefly on his shoulder, warm even through the wool of his jacket, before she vanished into the trees. The bargain deepened with the seasons. Autumn gave way to a hard early winter, and the livestock kills grew stranger. Not the clean tearing of a hungry predator, but something almost deliberate, carcasses arranged, throats cut with a blade rather than teeth in at least 2 cases that Harlan examined himself, torchlight in hand, kneeling in frozen mud while the farmer wept over a slaughtered milk cow and cursed the orc raiders who must have done it. Harlan said nothing to the farmer. He waited until his next meeting at the watchtower and laid out what he had seen for Bula instead, sketching the wounds in the dirt with a stick. She crouched over his crude drawing for a long time, frowning, her braid falling over one shoulder. "That is not the Ashfang's work," she said finally. "That is a knife. A good one, single-edged, held by someone who has butchered an animal before and did not care to hide it well. The Ashfang does not need to disguise itself as anything. It simply kills." "Then who is doing this?" "Someone who wants your people to believe my people are doing it," she said, and her eyes had gone hard and cold in a way he had not seen from her before, not even facing the beast itself. "I have heard rumors in my own clan of men skulking near the border with no honest trade to explain their presence. Poachers, perhaps, or worse. If someone wishes to poison the peace between your walls and my clan's fires, framing my people for slaughter is a clever way to do it." It was Harlan who first heard the name Sila's Marrow spoken with suspicion, from a stable hand who swore he had seen a stranger buying up quiet word about which farms kept their dogs chained at night, paying in coin too fine for a common drifter. It was Bula who found the actual camp, 3 days later, tucked into a fold of the deep wood just inside Orc territory where no human patrol would think to look, and no Orc hunting party bothered to check, because it was so close to the boundary stones. She brought Harlan there under a waning moon, moving through the trees with a silence that made him feel like a cart horse crashing through a rose garden by comparison, and together they lay on their bellies atop a ridge and watched 6 men in dark old leather butcher a stolen cow around a low fire, laughing about how easy the fool farmers were to frighten with a few claw marks carved by hand. "Marrow," Harlan breathed, recognizing the lean, scarred man directing the others. "That is Sila's Marrow. He has been buying grain futures at half price all autumn, betting the town would panic and sell cheap before winter." "Then he is not merely cruel," Bula murmured beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her against his side despite the cold. "He is patient. 10 years I hunted one enemy who wanted only to survive. This one wants to profit from other men's fear. I find I prefer the wolf." They watched a while longer, memorizing faces, counting weapons, and it was there, crouched shoulder to shoulder in the frost with danger a stone's throw away, that Harlan first understood how completely he had come to trust her, and how strange and unearned that trust felt given how little time had actually passed. He glanced sideways at her profile in the moonlight, the strong line of her jaw, the fierce concentration in her dark eyes, and something in his chest turned over slow and warm despite the cold air, despite everything sensible in him insisting this was not a thing a guardsman was allowed to feel about an Orc Huntress from across the river. She caught him looking. She did not pretend she had not. "You stare, Harlan Cooper," she whispered, amused despite the danger below them. "You are difficult not to stare at," he admitted, because lying to her had never once worked and he had stopped trying weeks ago. Something flickered across her face, surprise, and beneath it, unguarded for just a moment, pleasure. "Careful," she said softly. "A huntress who has been the pursuer for 10 years does not always know what to do when she becomes the pursued instead." "I am not trying to corner you," he said, and meant it as reassurance. "No," she agreed, turning back to watch the camp below, though her voice had gone quieter, rougher at the edges. "Not yet, you are not." They pulled back from the ridge before dawn without being seen, carrying between them the beginning of a plan neither of them could execute alone, evidence of Marrow's frame-up, but no proof solid enough yet to hand to Captain Voss without risking Bula's exposure as its source. It was Harlan who insisted they needed more, one clean piece of evidence tying Marrow directly to the false claw marks. It was Bula who insisted, just as firmly, that they needed to be careful, because a man clever enough to fake 10 years of Orc hostility overnight was clever enough to notice when he was being watched. She was right to worry. Neither of them noticed the trapper's boy who had followed Harlan's tracks partway from the watchtower 2 nights later, curious about the guardsman's strange nighttime habits, and who ran straight back to town with a story about seeing Harlan Cooper meeting a monster in the woods. Winter deepened, and so did they. It was on a night heavy with the first real snow of the season that the Ashfang found them instead of the other way around, and everything between Harlan and Bula changed all at once. They had gone further from the watchtower than agreed, tracking a fresh kill site nearly to the edge of the mill pond, and the beast came out of the tree line without warning, faster than either of them expected from a wounded, ancient creature, drawn perhaps by the scent of blood already on the wind from the slaughtered sheep they had been examining. It went for Harlan first. He would never be sure whether by chance or some malevolent memory of the man it had failed to kill months before. And this time there was no lantern to drop, no fence to catch it, only open snow and a spear he still did not truly know how to use. He got the shaft up in time to turn its first lunge, felt the impact shudder up through his arms hard enough to numb them, and then he was on his back in the snow with the Ashfang's weight pinning him, its rank breath hot on his face, one massive paw already drawn back to finish what it had started in autumn. Bula's scream tore through the clearing like something out of the old war songs. She hit the beast at a dead run, no knives drawn, simply raw fury and momentum, wrapping both arms around its throat and dragging it backward off Harlan's chest with a strength that should not have belonged to anyone, orc or otherwise. They rolled together in the snow, a tangle of green skin and gray fur, and Harlan scrambled up in time to see her drive a knife up under the beast's jaw to the hilt, twisting, screaming something in her own tongue that needed no translation to understand as 10 years of grief finally finding a target. The Ashfang shrieked, threw her off with a convulsion that sent her skidding across the snow, and fled again, always fleeing deeper into the timber, trailing blood so dark it looked black under the moon. Harlan was at her side before she had finished pushing herself upright, hands on her shoulders, checking her for wounds with the same rough urgency she had once checked his. "Bula. Bula, are you hurt? Let me see." "I am fine," she snapped, though her breath came ragged and there was a shallow claw mark across one forearm welling dark blood into the snow. "It ran. It always runs. 10 years and it always, you could have died," he said, and his voice cracked on the word in a way that surprised them both. "It had me down, it was going to kill me, and you ran straight at it with your bare hands, you could have. And you would have died if I had not," she said, sharper now, some old defensive instinct rising in her at the accusation buried under his fear. "Would you rather I had let it?" "No," he said. "No, that is not Bula. I am not angry at you. I am—" He stopped because there were no more careful words left in him, only the truth, raw and unpolished. "I have never in my life had anyone throw themselves at death to save me. I do not know what to do with that. I do not know what to do with you." She went still under his hands. The snow fell around them, soft and silent, and the forest held its breath. "Then do not do anything with it," she said low. "Simply let it be what it is." "What is it?" he asked, though some part of him already knew the answer was going to end whatever careful distance they had been pretending to keep. Bula Fireblood, huntress of 10 years, pursuer of a beast that had eluded every trap her clan had ever set, reached up and cupped the side of Harlan's face with a hand still trembling faintly from the fight, her calloused thumb brushing his jaw with a gentleness that felt more dangerous to him than any beast in the deep wood. "It is that I have spent 10 years chasing one thing," she murmured, "and I did not notice, until tonight, that somewhere along the way I stopped only chasing it." He kissed her before he could think better of it, or perhaps because he had finally stopped trying to think better of it at all, snow melting against warm skin, her hands fisting in the front of his coat, his own shaking as they found her waist, the whole cold night narrowing down to the astonishing fact that Bula Fireblood was kissing him back with a hunger that felt like 10 years of loneliness meeting his own and recognizing itself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to his, tusks grazing his cheek, and laughed an actual laugh, low and disbelieving. "A guardsman," she said. "Of all the creatures in this world I imagined finally cornering me, I did not think it would be a scrawny fence watcher with a spear he barely knows how to hold. I am better with the spear than I used to be, he said, a little breathless, a little giddy with disbelief of his own. You have been teaching me. I have been teaching you many things, she agreed, and kissed him again, softer this time, like a promise instead of a discovery. They did not speak of what it meant that night, not fully, though something unspoken and enormous had shifted between them, and both of them carried it home like a coal held carefully against the cold. The trapper's boy's story had, by then, made its way through half of Thornwatch, growing teeth and claws with each retelling, until it was no longer a strange nighttime meeting, but a guardsman consorting with an orc monster in the deep wood, plotting who knew what against decent folk. Harlan felt the change in the town before anyone said a word to him directly, a stiffness in the tavern keeper's nod, a wide berth given to him on the market road, whispers that stopped a beat too late when he entered a room. It came to a head on a gray market morning when he was sent, with 2 other guardsmen, to help unload a supply wagon near the town well, and Bula, against every promise she had made about staying past the watchtower, appeared at the tree line at the edge of the square in broad daylight, cloak drawn up over her braid, because she had urgent word that Merrow's gang planned to move against a border farm that very night, and there had been no time to wait for their usual meeting. She should have sent a message another way. She would say so herself later with real regret. But 10 years of hunting had made her impatient with delay when lives were at stake, and she had trusted wrongly that a cloak and caution would be enough to cross unseen. It was not enough. A woman drawing water at the well saw the green of her hand where the cloak slipped, and screamed the word orc loud enough to carry across the whole square, and within a dozen heartbeats half the market had turned, and men were grabbing pitchforks and hammers and whatever else stood nearest, and Captain Voss himself came striding out of the guardhouse with his sword already drawn. And Bula Fireblood, Huntress, who had faced down a demon-touched beast without flinching, found herself surrounded in the middle of a human market square with nowhere left to run and no wish, even now, to spill human blood over her own carelessness. Harlan did not remember deciding to move. One moment he was standing frozen with the others, and the next he was pushing through the crowd, putting himself bodily between Bula and the captain's sword, both hands raised, his own guardsman's blade still sheathed at his hip because drawing it now would only make everything worse. "Stand down," he said, loud enough for the whole square to hear, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. "Stand down, all of you. She is not here to hurt anyone." "Cooper, get out of the way," Voss barked, though something in his eyes had gone uncertain at the sight of his own guardsman shielding an orc with his body in the middle of the market. "That is an armed orc inside town walls. That is a treaty violation plain as day, and you are standing between me and my duty." "She saved my life in the autumn," Harlan said, and it was the first time he had told anyone the true story of that night, and every word of it felt like tearing something open. "The beast that has been savaging the border farms, the real one, not whatever Lycila's marrow has been feeding this town. She has been hunting it for 10 years, and it near killed me twice, and both times she stood between me and it when she owed me nothing at all. If you want to put a sword through her, Captain, you put it through me first, because I will not step aside." The square had gone utterly silent. Someone's dropped pitchfork clattered against the cobbles. Bula stood behind him, tense as a drawn bowstring, one hand hovering near her own knife but not drawing it, watching the back of Harlan Cooper's neck as though she could not quite believe what he was doing. "He speaks truth," she said finally, her voice carrying clear and steady across the square despite the dozens of frightened, hostile eyes fixed on her. "I have crossed your border more than once this past season, and for that I owe an apology I am willing to give. But I have not raised a hand against a soul in this town, and the beast tearing your livestock apart is not my doing. It is a curse from an old war none of us chose, and it has taken as much from my people as it threatens to take from yours. I did not come today to fight you. I came because men who mean this town far more harm than I ever could are moving against a border farm tonight, and I would rather you hate me and live than trust the wrong man and bury your neighbors." Voss did not lower his sword immediately. He studied her for a long, taut moment, the whole market holding its breath, and then he looked at Harlan, at the stubborn, frightened, unshakable set of his young guardsman's shoulders, and something in the older man's face shifted, not to trust exactly, but to the particular respect one gives a fool willing to die for something he believes in. "Talk," Voss said finally, sheathing his sword an inch, then another. "You have until I count to 50 before I change my mind, Orc. Which farm and what proof do you have that it is not your own kind behind it? It was not forgiveness. It was not even trust, not yet. But it was a door left open a crack, and Bula Fireblood, who had spent 10 years being feared and avoided, and more recently, quietly welcomed by exactly one lonely guardsman, stepped through it and laid out everything she and Harlan had gathered: the false knife marks, the camp in the fold of the deep wood, the name Sila's Marrow spoken aloud in front of the whole square for the first time. It did not end the town's fear that day, but it planted the first seed of doubt in the story the townsfolk had been told, and it meant that, when the guard rode out that night to the border farm Bula had named, they rode prepared for men, not monsters, and caught 2 of Marrow's gang red-handed with stolen grain, and a set of carving knives that matched the wounds on every slaughtered animal for 3 months. Marrow himself slipped away into the dark, furious and unmasked, and word went round Thornwatch fast that the Orc raids had been no such thing at all. It should have been an ending. It was, instead, only the calm before the worst of it. Sila's Marrow, cornered and desperate, decided in the days that followed that if he could not profit from a false accusation, he could at least make the truth burn the town down around the people who had begun, in whispers, to doubt him. He had watched the Ashfang's movements as closely as anyone that autumn, learned its habits, its wounded shoulder, its hatred of fire and its hunger, and on the night of Thornwatch's midwinter market, the one day of the year when nearly the whole town gathered in the square for trade and small festival, lanterns strung between the stalls, children running underfoot, farmers and merchants and guardsmen all crowded together with their guard down, he and what remained of his gang drove the wounded, half-mad beast out of the deep wood and straight toward the town gates with torches and noise, meaning to let it wreak whatever chaos it liked, while they slipped away in the confusion with a wagon of stolen coin. Harlan was standing near the well, sharing a cup of hot cider with Bula in full view of anyone who cared to look. She had come openly this time, at Voss's own grudging invitation, to help oversee the market in case Marrow's men made a move. When the first scream went up from the gate, the Ashfang came through the square like a black wave, scattering stalls and lanterns and people alike, and in the panic and the smoke and the overturned torches, it was Harlan who found himself suddenly separated from Bula, shoved back against the low stone wall of the well with his sword drawn and useless in his shaking hand as the beast, drawn by his scent from 2 encounters it had never forgotten, turned its burning eyes on him in front of the entire terrified town. "Get back!" Voss was shouting somewhere in the smoke, but there was no back for Harlan to get to, only stone at his spine and a demon-touched wolf the size of a plow horse closing the last few strides between them, jaws already open, and every soul in that square who had ever called Bula Fireblood a monster watching the moment unfold, certain that whatever happened next, an orc had somehow brought this horror down upon them. Bula's scream cut through the smoke like a blade. She came off the top of an overturned market stall in a leap that carried her clean over 3 fleeing townsfolk, landing between Harlan and the Ashfang with both knives already drawn. And this time there was no ravine, no deep wood, no privacy of the border to hide what she was. The entire town of Thornwatch Crossing watched an Orc Huntress plant herself between their guardsmen and a monster, and refused to move, watched her take a claw strike meant for Harlan's throat across her own shoulder, and answer it by driving a knife into the beast's ruined lung so deep her fist met flesh. 10 years, she snarled at the creature, voice raw enough to carry over the screaming crowd. 10 years you ran from me, and now you come here to him, in front of everyone, and you think I will let you take one more thing from me. The Ashfang, cornered at last against the very well Harlan had been backed into, wounded past even its cursed endurance, made one final desperate lunge, and Bula met it head-on, wrapping both arms around its throat exactly as she had in the snow months before, twisting with every ounce of 10 years' grief and rage and something new, something fiercer than either, until with a final shuddering scream the beast that had haunted the border for a decade went still and heavy and silent in her arms. For a long moment nobody in the square moved at all. Smoke drifted between overturned stalls. A child somewhere was crying. And Bula Fireblood knelt in the frozen mud of Thornwatch's market square, blood-soaked and shaking, cradling the head of the monster that had killed her sister, while the entire town that had feared and cursed her stared in silence at what she had just done in plain sight, to save a man they had once mocked for keeping her company. Harlan was the first to move. He crossed the space between them on legs that did not feel entirely his own and dropped to his knees in front of her, cupping her bloodied face in both hands, heedless of the crowd, heedless of everything but the woman in front of him. "You did it," he said, voice breaking. "Bula, 10 years, you did it." She looked at him, and for the first time since he had known her, Bula Fireblood's fierce composure cracked entirely open, and she pressed her face into his shoulder and wept grief for a sister 10 years gone, and something else beneath it, something that felt almost like relief at finally being allowed to put the weight down. Around them, slowly, the square began to stir again. Someone started clapping, uncertain and alone at first, and then more joined, and Captain Voss himself pushed through the crowd, sword sheathed, and stood over the two of them with an expression Harlan had never seen on the older man's face before. "Cooper," Voss said gruffly, "get her to the healer before that shoulder festers. And you," he looked down at Bula, and something that might almost have been respect roughened his voice, "you saved my guardsman's life in front of this whole town, orc or not. I will not forget that. Neither, I think, will they." It was not the end of every prejudice that had ever lived in Thornwatch Crossing. Old fears did not vanish because of one bloody, astonishing night in the market square. But it was, undeniably, a beginning. The day the town stopped seeing only a monster's kin and started, however slowly, seeing Bula Fireblood. Sila's marrow and what remained of his gang were caught within the week, fleeing north along the wagon trail with stolen coin, and no story clever enough to explain it. And Thornwatch's justice for them was swift and unambiguous. The false tale of orc raiders unraveled entirely, and for the first time in longer than Harlan could remember, talk in the tavern turned not to fear of the border but to grudging, astonished gratitude. But triumph, Bula found in the weeks that followed, made an uneasy bedfellow with purpose lost. She had spent 10 years defined by a single hunt, every waking thought bent toward one end, and now that end had come and gone, leaving her strangely unmoored in a way that no victory feast or town's gratitude could fill. She grew quieter at the watchtower, sharpened knives that needed no sharpening, stared too long into the fire. "What troubles you?" Harlan asked one night, weeks after the market, when her shoulder had healed to a thin white scar and the whole town had begun cautiously to call her by name instead of by fear. "You won. The thing that took your sister is dead. You should be at peace." "I do not know how to be a woman who is not hunting something," she admitted, staring into the flames. "For 10 years that was the whole shape of me, Huntress of the Ashfang. Now it is gone, and my clan will expect me to come home to take my place, to finally accept a mate my mother chooses and build the hall she has wanted for me since I was a girl." She glanced sideways at him, something raw and uncertain in her dark eyes. "Thok Ironjaw has already sent word that he intends to press his suit again now that I am, as he puts it, finally free of my foolishness." "And are you free of it?" Harlan asked carefully. "Free enough to want him?" "No," she said, immediate and fierce, reaching for his hand across the small fire without hesitation, lacing her fingers through his. I do not want Thok Ironjaw or any warrior my mother might parade before me. I have spent 10 years being the one who chases Harlan Cooper. I know exactly what I want to catch now, and it is not him. He brought her hand to his lips, heart hammering. Then let me be the one who chases for once, he said. I mean it, Bula. I am done letting you decide alone what happens between us. I want to come with you. I want to stand in front of your mother and your clan the way I stood in front of my captain, and tell them the same thing I told this whole town, that I am not stepping aside. She looked at him for a long moment, firelight dancing in her eyes, and then she laughed soft, delighted, disbelieving all over again. You truly are not afraid of me. I have never once been afraid of you, he said. I have been afraid of losing you. There is a difference. She pulled him across the fire and kissed him hard enough to steal the breath from both of them, and when she finally drew back, she rested her forehead against his, tusks grazing his jaw, her voice gone low and rough with a hunger neither of them bothered hiding any more. Come with me then, she murmured. Corner me properly if you dare in front of my whole clan. I warn you, Harlan Cooper, it will not be so simple as facing down one frightened market square. I did not fall for you because things were simple, he said, and kissed her again. And this time there was no fire between them at all, only two bodies finding their way closer in the dark, her hands finally sliding beneath his coat, his fingers tangling in the thick braid she let loose for him alone. And for a long while after that the watchtower held nothing but the low sound of her name in his mouth and the astonished, tender wonder of a woman who had spent 10 years being feared, learning at last what it felt like to be wanted instead. They rode out 3 days later, Harlan on the town's steadiest horse and Bula on foot beside him because, she informed him with a grin, she had never yet met a horse that could keep pace with her when she meant business, toward the deep heart of Orc territory where the Fireblood clan kept its fires. The war camp spread across a wide clearing ringed by ancient pines, hide tents in ordered rows around a central longhouse of timber and stone, smoke rising from cook fires, the clang of a smith's hammer somewhere beyond the horse pens. Harlan felt every eye in the camp turn toward him the moment they crossed the tree line, felt the particular weight of being the only human for miles among a people who had every historical reason to distrust him. He kept his shoulders back and his hand near but not on his sword hilt, the way Bula had taught him, and stayed close at her side. Bula's mother, matriarch Bula Fireblood, met them at the door of the longhouse, a tall, broad-shouldered woman with iron-gray hair and eyes as sharp as her daughter's, a heavy fur cloak over armor that had clearly seen real war. She looked at Harlan the way Captain Voss once had, weighing him and finding him wanting before he had even spoken a word. You bring a human to my fire, Bula said, not quite a question. I bring the man who stood at my side when I finally killed the Ashfang, Bula answered, unflinching, and who has stood at my side in a dozen dangers since, and I bring him because I intend to choose him, mother, whether you welcome it or not. A ripple of muttering ran through the gathered clan. Thok Ironjaw, a broad-shouldered warrior with a scar bisecting one eyebrow, stepped forward from the crowd, arms crossed, contempt plain on his face as he looked Harlan up and down. This is what you choose over me, Thok said, more statement than question. A scrawny human who could not lift my axe. I do not need to lift your axe, Harlan said before Bula could answer for him, his voice steadier than he felt. I need only to stand where it counts. I have done that more than once already, and I will keep doing it for as long as Bula will have me. Thok laughed, ugly and short. Fine words for a man who has never faced clan trial. In our ways, any who would claim a Fireblood daughter must prove worth before the whole clan. Will your words hold up to that, human? Bula's hand shot out, gripping Thok's arm before he could say more. He has already proven himself against a beast that outlasted 10 years of my own hunting, and against a mob of your so-called cousins across the river who would have gutted me on sight if he had not put his own body between us. I do not need him to prove himself to you, Thok. I need him to be exactly what he already is. Bula raised a hand, silencing both of them, and studied Harlan for a long, unreadable moment. My daughter has spent a decade proving herself to no one but a ghost and her own grief, she said finally. I had begun to fear she would never let anything else matter to her again. You say you stood between her and death, human. Tell me plainly, not for pride, not for show, why? Harlan looked at Bula at the fierce, guarded hope in her eyes and answered without hesitation. Because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me ordinary, overlooked, no rank worth mentioning, and did not see nothing. She saw a man worth fighting beside. I would stand in front of any beast, any mob, any clan trial you care to name, before I let that go, matriarch. Not because I am strong enough to win every fight. Because I would rather die trying than live without her. The clearing went quiet. Even Thok had nothing sharp left to say. Bula Fireblood studied him a moment longer, then turned to her daughter, something almost gentle passing behind her sharp eyes. You have chosen a strange mate, Bula, but you have never once in your life chosen a weak one, even when the thing you chased wore fur and fangs instead of a face. I will not stand against this. The clan trial, when it came the following dawn, was not the bloody contest of arms Thok had hoped for. Custom allowed the challenged party to name the test, and Bula, watching her daughter's face, named instead a trial of endurance, and Harlan would run the gauntlet of the deep wood alone from dawn to dusk, marked with the clan's hunting sign, and if he returned by nightfall under his own strength, unbroken, the clan would recognize the claim regardless of Thok's objections. It was a test built for a hunter's patience and a hunter's courage rather than raw strength, and Harlan trained now by months at Bula's side to read a trail, to move quiet, to endure came stumbling back into the war camp exactly as the sun touched the tree line, exhausted, scratched, and grinning like a fool, with a hunting fang from a wild boar he had tracked and taken clean through the heart clutched in his fist as proof. Bula met him at the edge of the clearing and did not wait for ceremony. She kissed him in front of the entire clan, fierce and unashamed, tusks and lips and the salt-sweet taste of relief, while behind them Bula Fireblood allowed herself the smallest, most reluctant smile, and even Thok Ironjaw, grudgingly, inclined his head in the old gesture of a challenge conceded. That night, in the quiet of a tent given to them at the clan's edge, away from firelight and eyes, Bula finally let herself be caught the way she had promised, not cornered by fear or duty or a beast's teeth, but by choice, by a man who had chased nothing in his life half so fiercely as he had chased the right to stand beside her. She drew him down onto the furs with hands that had once driven knives into monsters and now trembled instead with a different kind of hunger, and murmured his name like something sacred between kisses. And when at last there was no more space left between them, no more armor, no more careful distance kept out of fear of being wrong for each other, she marked him in the old way of her people. A claiming mark drawn in careful lines along his shoulder in the dark red pigment the clan kept for exactly this purpose, her hand steady and reverent, her voice rough with emotion as she told him in her own tongue what it meant. Mine, chosen, kept. I have spent 10 years, she whispered against his skin afterward, wrapped together beneath the furs while the camp fires burned low outside, learning how to corner something and never let it go. I did not know until you that I would ever want to be caught in return. You are not caught, he murmured back, tracing the curve of her jaw in the dark. You are home. There is a difference. She laughed, soft and warm, and pressed closer. And outside the tent the deep forest that had once divided their two peoples settled into a rare and easy quiet. The year that followed was not without its small storms, old prejudices, did not dissolve overnight on either side of the river, and there were townsfolk in Thornwatch who still crossed the street rather than greet an orc walking openly through the market, and clan elders who muttered that a Fireblood daughter belonged among her own people rather than dividing her seasons between two worlds. But storms, Harlan learned, were easier weathered with someone fierce and steady beside you, and Bula Fireblood had never in her life been anything less than fierce. Captain Voss, true to his gruff word, found reason within a season to create a new post no guard captain before him had ever needed a liaison to walk the border, to carry word between the town and the clan, to make certain no misunderstanding curdled again into the kind of fear that had nearly cost a woman her life in a market square. He gave the post, without much ceremony beyond a grunted nod and a new badge of rank, to Harlan Cooper, the fence watcher nobody had ever thought worth promoting, and Harlan wore the honor with the same quiet steadiness he had worn everything else, never once forgetting how little the rank mattered next to what he had actually won. Bula did not vanish back into her clan's deep fires, nor abandon the hunter's freedom that had defined her for a decade. She built, instead, something new, a small stone and timber cottage raised with her own hands and Harlan's just beyond the old ruined watchtower, exactly on the boundary line where human land met orc land, neither fully one nor the other, belonging entirely to the two of them. She still hunted when the border needed watching, still moved through the deep wood with a huntress's silent grace, but she hunted now beside a man who tracked nearly as well as she did, who had earned, through patience and courage rather than raw strength, the right to stand at her shoulder rather than behind it. On the anniversary of that first night in the ravine, a year, almost to the day, since a beast had run across a river and changed both their lives forever, Harlan found her sitting on the flat stone outside their cottage at dusk, watching the sun sink gold and orange over the treetops that marked the line between two worlds she had learned to belong to equally. He sat down beside her, and she leaned into him without a word, her head against his shoulder, his arm coming around her waist as naturally as breathing. "A year," he said quietly, "feels longer somehow, in a good way." "It feels," Bula said, "like the first year of my life that was not spent chasing something I was afraid to lose." She turned her head, pressing a kiss to his jaw, her voice low and certain in the gathering dark. "I spent 10 years cornering my prey, Harlan Cooper. I never once imagined the day would come when I would be glad to finally be caught myself." "I did not corner you," he said, smiling against her hair. "I just refused to run." "Same thing in the end," she murmured, and pulled him closer as the last light faded gold over the border they no longer needed to fear. Two worlds and two hearts settled at last into one steady, unshakable home.